So I'm gonna record. Yeah, so still getting used to this fully digital format. Um, Kind of strange to be in an empty room, but do the best we can. And yeah, just feeling the nerves. I feel like the just the how sometimes it's hard to stay into the things that you commit to. So just showing up with that, like, okay, here we go. This is something I said I would do, so got to do it. And just aware to, when I planned this event, I didn't realize that it's the second anniversary of my grandfather passing. My poppy passed in 2020 on this day, like very early in the morning, and so I'm just grateful, stranged out by that, just the synchronicity of it all, because he was definitely a storyteller of many different kinds, mostly tall tales that you never know if they were true or not. So just kind of with that and honoring that strange lineage in my family of tale telling and you know uh, just you know practicing as if he is listening, as if those gone ones from this place still listen. Practicing that even when I have a hard time believing that it's true, which is sometimes true for me. It's hard to believe, but just practicing that it's true. And yeah, Alexis. And so the yeah, I might just jump right in because the story that showed up is massive, and it will probably take my many times of telling it to get it just right. And don't want to stay too late, so if it doesn't come to an end at the end, we'll find an end in the middle that feels both satisfying and provoking of our longing, because that would make a lot of sense for this story. I don't think I'm going to do a preamble about what this whole project is about, because I feel like everyone's been here before. You get it. You get it. All right. So, once upon a time, once before time, once when time was more like hummings of bees and less like a Bach symphony, once when time did less marching and more dancing, in a time like that, but a time like now also, because all time is once upon a time. There was a warrior. There was a warrior. There was a knight. His name was Rivlen, and Rivlen was like a grisly, hard stone wall of a man. He was that type of stone wall that hasn't moved in centuries and has all sorts of strange dried up lichens growing on it. Rivlin was the type of person who would do whatever was asked of him without hesitation. He'd grown up in that kind of warrior reality and mentality, and Rivlin, as he grew into his oldness and the gray began to pepper into his beard, something started to change. The gusto and the lust with which he was able to follow orders in his whole young life and to take life and deal death in his way started to wane. Started to wane from Rivlin, and that kind of loss was huge for him. This waning of his the energy that he had been riding, his ecological niche in this world that he was living in, the thing that he had staked his fame on. Um, and in that loss, this both this crashing but also this longing developed. Like, what else could there be in this world other than this way, this skull crushing, fast way of living and making one's way in the world? And at that time, Rivlen heard of Rivlen who, through his exploits had become a king of a kingdom called Lyonesse. Heard of across the this great sea, and past a wreath of fog that is often called Merlin's beard around an island, there was a kingdom, and this kingdom was called Cornwall. And in Cornwall there was a castle called Tintagel, and Tintagel was on an outcrop of rocks and had a bridge that crossed it that, maybe 2 or 3 men could defend against thousands, because the bridge was so long and narrow, and it was the only entrance to the kingdom. And the martial prowess of this castle was seductive to him. But the story goes that the martial prowess of Tintagel and of Cornwall had been plowed into the soil of that kingdom's history, that its present was growing out of the fertile soil of this history of martial prowess, but that its true flowering was in the proliferation of music and art and poetry and fine dress and amour, love, this courtly love, this like romantic scent that just hung over the whole land. It was said that the king of Tintagel, his name was Mark, King Mark, he was so interested in culture and in tilling the soil of this, of like beautifying the flower that he had grown out of this blood red soil of Cornwall, that he invited people, traders from all over the world, and that Tintagel was this strange place where you could hear Old Norse spoken alongside Arabic, and you could hear like old Scottish poems at the same time that you might hear Rumi, and that it was like this strange cocktail of soul. And the martial prowess and the history was seductive, but that sort of step towards soul was what really called Rivlen to Tintagel. And so he put out in his boat from Lyonesse across the water, what would probably be called France now, across the sea on these misty waves to Tintagel. And when he put on shore, you can imagine this like kind of big, almost like, yeah, he's stone, right? He moves in this very kind of robotic way. His hips don't sashay very much. There's not much freedom in this person's body as he walks to go to this like great place of magic and music and art. And upon his arrival, he sticks out like a sore thumb. Is this like strange, tall, armored man in the midst of the finery and the revelry. He arrives like kind of in the beginning of May, and he doesn't know, but he's showing up on the first day of this festival of love that King Mark has made his like yearly addition to the universe. He's decided that May is a festival of love, and then everybody just kind of hangs out in this stupor of love magic for the whole month. And Rivlen arrives in this, and King Mark sees him sticking out like a sore thumb. And instead of pushing away this strange martial outsider, he actually pulls him aside, and he's like, okay, like, you're wearing the wrong clothes, you're walking the wrong way, like, let's get you here. You massage out this military thing. Just from the beginning, Mark is just a confidant and connective, and he dresses Rivlin in the finest that he can supply for this huge man. And over time, over this month, the sort of like barking speech of this warrior starts to get peppered with poetry, and the like stern hawk-like gaze that he has starts to soften. And he maybe makes that move from just seeing the world to starting to behold the things that are happening there that are different than anything he's ever experienced in his life. And he starts to wonder about playing music, this like boyhood longing that he had to maybe learn how to play the harp before the sword got put in his hand, starts to creep back in, and maybe he takes his try at the harp. He's not very good at it, but he tries. And it's in this kind of like rebirth moment, this like refiring of his life, this changing, this alchemy of coming to Tintagel, that he witnesses across the room the most beautiful woman that he's ever seen. Who am I to describe what the most beautiful woman that Rivlin had ever seen is? But there she is, standing across the room. This the troubadours call that first moment of the glimpsing the like the far distant lady. She's like across the room, and this great longing leaps across the distance, and the distance feels farther than Lioness and Tintagel is away from each other. There's this incredible space between them that's just, for him, electrified in that first moment. And there's a way in which something leaps between them, and he knows it's electric for her too. She's attracted to his strange roughness, but his sort of childlike willingness to transform, to be here in this oven of soul. And it's said that the shyness of boyhood came back on to Rivlin in that moment, and he didn't know how to talk to her. He probably wouldn't have known how to talk to her even if he was in his comfort zone, but he had nothing to say except for gawking. And she made her way across the room, and the first thing that she said to Rivlin was, well, she introduced, there's this, small introduction, but the first thing of substance she said is, Sir, I have a grievance against you. You have wounded my friend, and I cannot give you. You have wounded my great friend, and I cannot give you forgiveness. And Rivlin stands there and gawks at this beautiful woman, and is racking his brain to try and come up with what kind of deed he'd done against someone who might know this woman, that he's now standing across from. What had he done? Who had he harmed? Had he killed some knight who she was related to? Like, what is happening? In his whole kind of list of things that he holds both as duty, but regretfully started to just kind of run through his whole entire head as he tried to make sense of who he might have harmed. And in that moment, in this kind of indexing, she walks away. She turns her back and just kind of walks out of the room, out of the court, and disappears from the room. She leaves it. She creates the spark and then leaves the room. Very troubadour move, I think. And then there's this. It's said that she refused to show up in court during the daytime for weeks on end, but she would always appear at night. There's this like nightliness, this like lunar quality to this courtship. And as they begin to flirt and come closer together, she reveals, as they are sitting out under the moon in in the orchard, she reveals that the great friend that Rivland has wounded is her heart. That her heart was wounded upon seeing him, and they fall in love in that moment, and in their falling in love in this moment, he kind of comes to the kind of peak of this transformation in him from this military man to a man of soul. And just so happens that White Flower is King Mark's brother, so he married into this family as they get married, and this beautiful love affair turns into a marriage, and that marriage bears fruit, and White Flower becomes pregnant. And as has become common with these stories, as we know, this pregnancy and this budding life begins to happen, and the first thing that happens after the life roots itself in White Flower's womb is that Rivland gets called off on some adventure. He gets called off on some adventure back in Lyonesse to defend his kingdom that he has left to come here. And Rivland leaves, just like they all have in these series of stories. Rivland leaves, and he goes back across the water, promising to come back, promising to fulfill his duty to love, which is so much more important to him now as he's crossed this threshold into a life of soulfulness. But Rivland does not return. On the other side of the water, some months later, he is caught and captured by his adversaries and beheaded, and his blood is spilt in his home country. And when word comes back across those misty waves to Tintagel, the pregnant White Flower is distraught. She is racked with grief. She's turned wild with grief, and she runs into the woods with only her closest caregiver, the midwife comes with her, and she runs into the pregnant woman, and goes wild and goes feral and lives there in the wood. And time passes as time does, and the pregnancy waxes to its fullness, and she begins to enter the pains of labor, and it is so great. The pain of the sorrow and the pain of the birthing, and the ecstasy of the birthing, they all kind of merge, and she's stricken in the wood there, giving birth with only the midwife in the deepness of that place. And something turns from the pain and the ecstasy of birth to the knife's edge of mortality of birthing in this fateful moment. And as the baby begins to come into the world, to crown into the world, it becomes obvious to the midwife that White Flower's life is going to be forfeit for the birthing of this child. That only the child will survive this experience. And so she asks White Flower what to name the child and where to send him, what to name him and what to do. And White Flower tells the midwife to name her child, Tristan. And Tristan means the child of sorrow, according to most French sources, because he rode into the world on this wave of sorrow. He was born a killer. He killed on his first day of his life with the death of his mother, is what she says about her son, the child of sorrow. But Tristan also, if you look at the Celtic root, comes from Drustan, which means child of fire. And so we'll see who we think Tristan might be at the end of the story. But Tristan is born, and his mother dies. White Flower dies, and she's buried there in the wood. And Tristan is spirited away by the midwife. And they make this choice. They make this choice to give him to the marshal, the steward of his father's kingdom, back across the sea. So they take him away from Tintagel and spirit him away on a boat back across the water to Lyonesse, and to raise him not as royalty, to raise him hidden with the marshal. His name is Roual, and his wife Florette. And to make this convincing, when the baby arrives, and Florette goes into a hut for some time. They hide the baby. She goes into a hut. She tells everyone she's pregnant, and she does this false birth. And so they call Tristan the twice born. And Tristan is born again as the son of Roual and Florette there. And he's raised on the edge of the sea in a small homestead, in a small community, and he's given free reign. He's given free reign because they're sure that no one knows that he's royalty, and so he's just given this life that we'd probably wish for all of our children, to roam and to be free. And often, if they couldn't find Tristan, they would find him staring out at the waves, watching the water crashing on this beautiful French shore again and again, and hearing the music of the water. And for 7 years, Tristan's life went on like this. He did all those boyhood things, and he watched the water, and he learned its music, and he learned how to fish, and he learned how to play. And he was raised as the son of Roual and Florette. And on his 7th birthday, they decided that, this free-ranging, watery boyhood needed some order. And so they sent him to another man whose name was Governal, and Governal was Tristan's first mentor. And Governal taught Tristan for the next 7 years the arts of hunting and dressing animals, until he was renowned in this area for his skill at hunting, and particularly his skill at skinning and dressing the animal. And while he learned how to hunt, he also learned how to hold a sword, and he learned how to ride a horse, and he especially learned the art of music. Every time Tristan touched an instrument, it sang. They say that even from his first pluck of the harp strings, his music wailed with longing. Longing rode into the room on Tristan's music, and it found its way nested in the hearts of all the people that heard him play, even from his first harp stroke. And he took most to music and to poetry, and he spent his hours doing that. All of those hours he had previously spent looking at the sea now became mimicking its music on the harp. So for 7 years, again, and then 7 years in the myth maybe is longer, but 7 years pass in the company of Governal until he's called back to be with Roual and Florette, to return to his home, and he returns skilled. He returns a young man, 14, and 14 at this time being maybe different than 14 now, but it's important to remember that he's a teenager. This young man who's learning to be in the world with his skill and his power that he's put his life behind. And he returns home to Florette and Roual, the only parents he's ever known, and reintegrates into the life there. He's brought closer to society, closer to courtly community at this time in his life, kind of introduced, but never as royalty, right? Just as Tristan, son of the Marshal, and it is on one of these kinds of days, doing what they would always do, that from the sea, from the great north, across the Wales and Swans roads, came a boat of traders, a boat of Viking traders from Norway, all bedecked in blue glass beads and jade and drinking horns and all sorts of strange pelts. And they landed there on the beach in this small community and began to put out their wares. And their wares smelt of the cold frozen north, but they also brought spices from Egypt and jade from the Black Sea and pelts from all over the world. And this sort of incredible menagerie of things is now set up on the beach out near Tristan's home, and him and his father Rual and his brothers, his siblings, go down and they peer, and they're most intrigued by these sort of cage after cage after cage after cage of hunting birds that these Norwegians have brought. There's merlins and goshawks and harpy eagles, and just these incredible birds of prey, cage after cage after cage. And Tristan is absolutely enamored with these hawks and falcons, and asks Rual if they can get one, if he can take it home, if he can learn how to hawk, all of these things. And it's incredible. It's this, really exciting experience. And of course, Rual, falls for the youthful passion of his son being infatuated with this new skill, and buys him this hawk. And as Rual is getting ready to have the hawk carried home, Tristan is continuing to look around on the ship, and he spies sitting in the corner 2 men at a chess table. They're on the deck, but on the corner of the deck, and he walks up and he jumps over the rail and he begins to talk to them. Forgot to mention that he studied the language, and so he speaks Norse. He speaks Old Norse, and so he begins to speak to these traders about the chess game, and to ask them about their strategy, and to do some not so humble 14-year-old bragging about his own skill at chess. And so, as most of us would do, if a 14-year-old started to brag to us about how good they are at chess, we probably would challenge them to a game of chess. So one of the traders challenges Tristan to a game of chess. And Tristan sits down, and they begin to play, and he's sitting on the deck, and they play, and move after move the intensity rises, and the beauty of the game begins to become apparent. And the rest of the traders gather round, and they begin to watch this sort of beautiful back and forth between Tristan and the trader on the chessboard, this sort of almost duel of the wits that they're having. And it goes on hours after hour after hour. The game after game after game, Tristan beats each of the traders. And at some point, the captain of the ship looks to one of the other traders and says, "We need to leave, and we need to take this boy with us." Who knows how that thought came into his head, but that's what he did, and they pushed off into the sea. The dad has disappeared. He took the hawk back. He's like, "Oh, Tristan's just playing chess." He goes off back home. He'll make his way. And the ship pushes off into the sea while Tristan is deep in the game with one of the traders, and they're gone. With no trace, off, floating out across the water. And it takes game and game again for Tristan to realize what's happened. And the fear and the adventurousness of it mixed together, and he doesn't wail for home or cry out to be taken back, but he gives himself to the sea, this place that he has known to watch and learn the music of his whole life. Now, finally out on its waves in this vessel, he rides out with these Norwegian traders. Well, some miles out of the orbit of the kingdom, and after the losing at chess to the 14-year-old becomes a little bit of a less savory joy, the traders start to really question what they've done. They're like, his dad's going to come looking for him, and actually getting beat over and over again by a teenager is really annoying. Like, we probably shouldn't have done this. Like, yeah, he can sing and play chess, and the whole kind of scene becomes a hive of bees. They don't know what to do. A disturbed hive of bees, and they don't know what to do, and they decide that they're gonna cut off their lifeboat, put their lifeboat in the water, put Tristan in it with a piece of bread and some drinking water, and just cut him off and give him to the sea, because he'll either make it home or not, but he won't be their problem anymore. And that is exactly what they do. They cut Tristan off and sent him out afloat on the water. And he floats out there in the water, in the waves, and he just gives himself to this experience. Can you imagine being 14 and being alone on the sea and just giving yourself to it? There's this deep love and trust between him and the sea, and he gives himself to the sea. And at some point, he enters a fog, a dense fog, and the dense fog, the 9 waves in the dense fog pushes him closer and closer to some shore that he's never seen before. And his boat beaches, and no one knows how long Tristan floated on the sea, but his boat beaches there. And in the mist, some people swear that he saw antlered figures standing there, tall, antlered figures, featureless, in the fog. And as he ran towards these antlered figures, they disappeared. At the same time that he began to hear the barking of hounds. And the barking of hounds exploded from the forest just after a great white hart, or a white stag, bursted from the woods. He locks eyes with the white stag, and just as the hounds catch it and bring it to the ground. And behind the hounds, hunters he's never seen before come running out of the wood, speaking some language similar to languages that he understands, but not quite. And he, instead of ducking down or hiding away, he walks right up to these traders with his youthfulness. Or not these traders, sorry, these hunters, with his youthfulness, and he walks right up to them, and he tries to get in on their camaraderie, this hunt that they've been on, but their blood is up. They've been in the woods all day, and they kind of ignore him, and there's a little bit of hostility of pushing him away. And as the hunters go to make the first cut to dress the animal, he sees their technique, and he says to himself, he realizes that he knows better than them how to dress an animal. He knows, his young teenage self is like, I know better than you. And he raises his hands and gets them to stop, and he says, I can show you something that will change your life. I know a way to dress an animal far superior. And he communicates this somehow to them with a mixture of languages he speaks and miming. And for some reason, the hunters listen to him. And they let him show them how to dress the animal. And at first, they're confused. And then they see the art of it. And then they get excited. Because if there's one thing that their king loves more than anything else, it's something new. And this is new to them. And so they become fast friends with Tristan, and they say, they get him to understand that he has to come with them back to where they're going and show their king what he's done, what this magic with the dressing of the white hart. And so he joins this band of hunters, and they spend the next time getting to know each other and making their way back to their castle, which just happens to be Tintagel there. And the first time he glimpses that bridge going over the stony outcrop is beautiful. He can't. It's like this bell ringing in him. This witnessing of this place, this beauty, this majesty of Tintagel. And he's brought into Tintagel and introduced to King Mark. And the hunters explain in their language that this young person was able to dress the animal in a way that no one's ever seen, and they pull out the pelt and they show it to Mark, and Mark is similarly taken. Luckily, Mark also speaks many other languages, and so Tristan and Mark are able to communicate with each other, and they become fast friends. A friendship built on the hunt at first, until one night where Tristan is sitting in the hall, and somehow a harp comes into his hands, and he begins to sing and play. And that's when the true love between Mark and Tristan is solidified. Because if we remember, King Mark loves poetry and loves music, and Tintagel is a place of soul. And Tristan's music is nothing if not soulful, and that longing descends on the room, and he's instantly accepted by the court in that moment for what he brings. This longing to be filled. This longing for a home you've never known, or for a love that you've only glimpsed, that comes like waves out of the harp when Tristan plays it. And time passes in that way. Meanwhile, you can imagine at home, Roual and Florette are quite concerned. And they have been for however much time he's been away, but at some point, Roual set off on a mission. He set off to find his son. And as he's traveling around his own kingdom, realizing that there's been no word of Tristan, he comes across the sea, and somewhere else in Cornwall, in a pub somewhere, he hears tell of this singer in Tintagel, this soulful, longing, blues singing harp character who instantly he knows it must be Tristan. No one else sings like Tristan. There can't be another one. And so he makes his way to Tintagel, and we can see how it's all starting to all the forces are starting to gather here around Tintagel. And when Roual arrives and he sees Tristan, every step between the pub and Tintagel, every step between his front door and Tintagel's gate, he told himself, he's here to pull Tristan away, to take Tristan home, to reunite his family, to to make right what was wronged when the traitors stole him. And the second he sees Tristan sitting next to King Mark, all resolve of taking Tristan home disappears, because he sees that his son finally belongs. That love between Mark, if we remember, Mark is his uncle, so that love between a nephew and his uncle is too great. Tristan has found his place here in Tintagel. So instead of standing up and yelling at Tristan and demanding that he comes home, he waits until the feast, and he stands up and he gives a toast. And this toast is a revelation of Tristan's true pedigree. For the first time since his mother's death, Tristan's true lineage is spoken out into this room. And he tells Mark that Tristan is indeed his nephew and the son of Rivalen and White Flower, and the whole history of his raising and his hiddenness. And he's told. Tristan's told, but everyone's told. And Tristan is revealed to be who he truly is. And if you thought he belonged before, well, this is a whole different level of belonging. It's a whole different level of belonging. And Rural, to his credit, goes home to his family, and he leaves Tristan there. And there's something so deep in that kind of love that the people who have written down this story really try to make clear. That depth of love of letting his son go back to his true home. And all is beautiful in Tintagel in those seasons. And at the end of the season, as seasons end, after Tristan's been there some time, the veneer of enchantment begins to wear off. This new home begins to wear off, and as he's closer to Mark, begins to hear about some of the troubles of living in this kingdom and what's happening. And he's told that indeed the kingdom of Cornwall, with its heart at Tintagel with King Mark, is bound to the kingdom of Ireland. And the kingdom of Ireland demands every year a tax of young people, of young men and women to go and to serve in indentured servitude and slavery in the kingdom of Ireland. And so every year, Ireland sends its most fearsome, scary, brutal, half-giant knight, whose name is Morholt, to come and collect the tax of humans from Cornwall, as Cornwall's lifeblood of children is sapped by the Irish kingdom in payment of some old feud and some old wronging. And it's been this way for a long time. And when the season comes around to start gathering the young people, Tristan, seeing in the faces of those young people himself, right? Because he's not much more than a child at this point. He asks Mark if there's any way that this can change. Where does this stop? How does this stop? And he does say, in fact, there is a stipulation that if a champion from Cornwall is able to defeat a champion from Ireland, that the tax will be that will end the tax. That by judgment of battle, the tax could be ended. And without hesitation, without thinking about it, without seeing the opponent, Tristan makes his claim. That it's his to do. It's his to do. And so when Morholt, the giant of Ireland, arrives on the shore to ask to demand the tax, he's met with Tristan, this young, lithe, pale, moody sort of Morrissey of a character in his knight's armor there on the beach, demanding that instead of giving the tax, that they will have a duel. And Morholt agrees and stipulates that it has to happen on where in the cove where his people are camped out in the next away from Tintagel, away from the center of things in this cove. And so Tristan agrees, and Tristan they decide to do it the next day, and so Tristan sleeps at night, and the next morning he is put in his armor, and he rides his white horse down to the beach, puts his white horse in this little boat with him, and rides the boat over to the next cove. And as he rides into the cove, he sees Morholt sitting there with his sword freshly sharpened in the sand, awaiting Tristan's arrival by himself there in the cold sea air. And Tristan arrives with his horse. He takes his horse out of his boat and ties it up to a piece of driftwood, and then he turns around and he lights a match and lights his boat on fire. He burns his boat behind him, and then yells out to Morholt, the giant of Ireland, "I burned my boat because there's only one boat needed, because only one of us is leaving, and it's me." And Martin Shaw puts it, that's a fucking power move right there. Burn your boat on the beach. Tell the giant of Ireland that there's no way he's leaving this place. So Tristan pulls his sword, and they begin this battle, and you can really really see it as like skinny 16-year-old kid and a true giant, and the speed of the child is no match for the just sheer weight of blow after blow after blow of this giant, again and again and again, relentless, until at some point that speed slackens and the giant's sword comes down and just slashes through the meaty part of Tristan's thigh, this deep gash, just oozing with Tristan's lifeblood into the sand. And they fight and they fight and they fight, and that strength seems to never wane until just one moment of distraction. Who knows what happens? Some bird flies the right way across the sun, and Morholt loses his concentration, and Tristan is able to swing his sword up above his head and bring it down onto Morholt's giant head. So we got probably just the tip, right, where this guy's big, just right into Morholt's skull, and it goes through flesh, and the sword lands in the bone, in the skull of Morholt, and it will not release. The sword is stuck in his head, and Tristan wrenches it out, and a piece of his sword is stuck in the giant's skull. His sword is broken, and he, I don't know what that would feel like, but as the giant slumped to the ground and expired on the beach. But he wipes his sword and he puts it away, and he never loses that sword. He puts it away. And as the sense of victory descends upon him, he looks down at his wound, and it's no longer just oozing blood, but it's oozing green pus and foul odor. And he knows, just as he blacks out from the poison, he knows that he's poisoned. And he briefly wakes up to his body being lifted from the beach and put on Morholt's ship and taken back to Tintagel. And he briefly wakes up to the worried face of Mark as he's brought into the gate. And he briefly wakes up as he's put into bed and tended. And over weeks and weeks and weeks, they attempt every kind of remedy that they possibly could imagine to heal this wound. And Tristan lays there wasting away, thinner and thinner and paler. And he wakes once when Mark is in the room. And he says to Mark, I know I've dreamed what you need to do. Put me in a ship by myself with my harp and send me out to sea. It's the only way I can be healed. It's the only way that I can be healed on that deep water. You know, this is a person who trusts the sea. And Mark listens. Mark listens with his ears, and Mark has horse's ears hidden under his hair. He listens with these deep old ears to the magic in this statement, his horse's ears, and he agrees to put Tristan out onto the water in a little tiny boat with the harp. And as they put Tristan with his harp in the water, and the sea breeze plays the harp, and his boat goes and disappears into the distance, taken on the tides, playing the harp, they hope that Tristan's dream would prove to be prophetic. And he floats there for time out of time, the wind of the sea playing his harp in this strange ocean music that Tristan is so akin with. And at some point, the ship, it makes its way to Ireland, because strange magics like this poison can only be healed in the place of their origin. And so when the boat lands on the shore in Ireland, it's found because while it was riding in, 3 woodsmen heard the strange sound of fairy music from the sea, the harp playing in the sea breeze. And the Irish probably still remembered a little bit about the magical intelligence of the universe, and that wasn't something that they were going to pass up in that moment, this strange fairy music. And so they took the boy, this wasteling, pale boy, out of the ship with his harp and brought him to the High King and Queen of Ireland. And there's something you should know, that Morholt is the Queen's brother, and that's how he got the job of going and getting the tax from Cornwall. And so when Tristan briefly wakes up and he's brought into the court of Ireland, he guesses where he is by the language and the accent. And he knows that to reveal himself for who he truly is would be a death sentence. And he falls back into a stupor, and he wakes up again. And he's forced to introduce himself. So he introduces himself as Tram Trist, and he's then forced to play his harp, even though he's ill and dying. He's forced to play his harp. And play he does for the King and Queen of Ireland, and that fairy music does its magic. And they agree to heal him. Because when the Queen looks at his wound, she sees that she knows exactly what kind of poison it is. It's Irish poison, and this kind of poison can only be healed where it is, and a music like that must be saved. But she also decides that she's not going to do it, that her daughter Isolde is learning the arts of healing, and this should be the first healing that she undertakes by herself. And so the next time Tristan wakes up, the first thing he sees is golden hair draped over him in his soft gaze, as Isolde slowly works cleaning his wound. And this, it's not like yellow hair or blonde hair, it's this hair of pure strings of gold over him. And he falls back into a stupor. He wakes up again to Isolde sitting next to him and playing the harp herself. And it's said that Isolde was equally an incredible harpist to Tristan, but that her music, instead of invoking longing and emptiness, invoked fullness and satisfaction. And as Tristan healed by the magical art of Isolde, she was an incredible healer. She started demanding of him to teach her his longing music. And so they played together. And they strung this chord between longing and fulfillment. And when anyone who heard Tristan and Isolde play together would swear that the purest form of love entered the room. And maybe it was before that they were in love, but most people say not. That their love was there from the first moment. So as Tristan heals, and this love is starting to happen, he starts to really take into account the kind of predicament that he's in. If they figure out who he is, it's all over. And so one night, when the moon was hiding its face, Tristan got up out of bed and stole away from the Irish kingdom and returned to Tintagel. He returned to Tintagel, and when he arrived, he found the kingdom both deeply excited for his return, and also in a sort of fearful chaos, because his return put it in the minds of all of the barons of Cornwall that, given that Mark didn't have children of his own, and that he so loved Tristan, which was obvious by Tristan's reception upon his return. Remember, they were sure he would die. That the kingdom will probably go to Tristan if Mark doesn't have children. And so they begin to badger Mark to get married. And Mark has no interest in getting married. Mark loves his festivals of love and his secret trysts in the orchard of Tintagel, and the art of love without the commitment of marriage. That's his field. And also, he's afraid to really let any woman get to know him because of his horse's ears, which he feels pretty ashamed of despite their magic. And it is in this kind of moment of Tristan's return and Mark's bullying by the barons of Cornwall that Mark is staring out of his window looking across the sea, and he sees something flying across the sea towards him. These two black dots in the distance. And they come closer and closer, and as they come closer across the waves, he sees that it's two white doves, and their beaks are linked by something that's glinting like gold in the sunlight. And as the two white doves come close enough, he sees that the two white doves are carrying a single strand of golden hair, that they land on his windowsill and drop into his hand. And in that moment, he swears that if he's going to marry someone, he's going to marry whoever this golden, not yellow, not blonde, this golden strand of hair is from. Because he is well versed in magic with his ancient horse to his ears, and this is a sign, if there ever was one. And when he shows the hair to his confidant Tristan, of course Tristan knows exactly in that moment who the hair is from. It could only be Isolde, his one true love that he met in Ireland and ran away from. But the first thing he says is, "Uncle, I will go and get her for you. Uncle, I will go and get her for you." Because we both know that this is a sign. And that is where we will end the story. Because there's so much more, and that is enough. Thank you. So, we're well versed here. We're well versed in this now at this point. Being on Zoom is cool because you can, if you want to feed the story out loud, you can. So the offering is to find a place that you find yourself in the story. See if is there an image that's still with you? Is there something that's haunting? Yeah, or is it truly like a moment? Oh, I'm in the moment where with the hawks on the beach. I'm in the moment with the antlered shadows. In that realm. So, and just as an offering to the story, as the offering to the sustenance that stories can be, just to offer an image back. And you can share when you're ready, if you want to.
Being placed wounded into a boat with the wind playing the harp strings.
Well, for one, realizing that I was in Faulkner's Tristan and Isolde all of a sudden and being so stoked about it. And the moment of honor with her last breath, the naming of her child, like I found myself wondering what it would be like to be the mother of a child right on my last breaths. Yeah.
I didn't get to hear it all because of technical challenges, but I heard from the battle on, and just that last thing you were talking about just stuck with me of, him just being like, we both know this is a sign, so I'll go get her for you. And just how, I don't know, just how down Tristan is, like, just, for whatever, like, life is throwing at him.
I think what is really sticking with me is striking the chords of longing and fulfillment. That was one that we said together multiple times after you'd said it.
Is that what you said?
Was that the line there?
Yes, but that's what you heard, and that's more important than what I said.
It was something along those
but
lines.
Yeah, I'm so curious about that image as well. It's incredible. I'm with the just yeah that moment that his dad is such an interesting character. The that turning towards soul, and what that means is really curious to me. That's where I am tonight with the story.
Well, first of all, what a cliffhanger. Um, yeah, just sitting with like how, even though, you know, he's basically born of tragedy, how he's kind of this, like, such a golden boy, and everything he does is like comes to him so easily and does everything perfectly. And so right when it was like, you know, this part of the story comes up, and I'm like, oh, is he gonna do something like bad? So yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear what comes next.
I think Trantrist is really interesting.
I know the way that in the sources, the way they put it is he turned his name inside out, but I can't figure out how that's Tristan inside out. But I guess it's probably because he's Tristram in the Old English. So it's yeah, so it's something. Tristan doesn't really work, but Tristram is Trist.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I've definitely heard or seen his name written that way. So
and being born twice from flowers.
The piece of the blade that stuck in the giant's head.
Any last morsels out there?
I also, you specifically said the knife's edge of mortality. And I see a comment from Dad echoing that.
Well, yeah, I'm so grateful. Thanks for being here and for hearing what you heard and reflecting back. And yeah, I think this is like a 5-day long story. So maybe next time. Yeah, I think, come back again for part 2 of how many ever is needed, but it's a deep one. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to send out my gratitude to the sources. There's so many sources, like Bob, you brought in Wagner, and there's also before Wagner, you've got, obviously Sir Thomas Malory. Like, the longest book of La Morte d'Arthur is the story of Tristan. And also Gottfried von Strassberg, who wrote an incredible poem in German of the life of Tristan. And then, to all of the people who after that took this story in their mouth, and then, most directly to Martin Shaw for his work with the story, and for yeah, the way that he's allowed it to enter my imagination, and yeah, I just feel grateful for tales like this, right? That when I was thinking about it earlier, it's this sense of like, it's a romance. It's very novel-esque, but then there's like pinpricks of the mythic in it. It's a hybrid. It's a hybrid between the way that we think of stories now and some of these older currents, and so I'm really grateful for that. So thanks for hearing me tell that story for the first time, and I hope that you have dreams filled with longing and fullness. I'm gonna take that away with me. Thank you.
It's very, very transit appropriate, like nailed the transits.
You know, synchronicity is really helpful. Thanks. Yeah, be well, everybody.